Hammam Farah is a Palestinian Christian currently living and working in Toronto, Canada. With a clinical focus on trauma and a family currently under siege in Gaza, Hammam brings a unique perspective to the unfolding and devastating events in the region. Hammam's passion for psychotherapy stems from a conviction that a better world is possible. Bettering the self and committing to the common good mirrors our commitment to justice, healing, and peacemaking. Hammam Farah, welcome to Common Home TV.
Thank you for having me.
To begin, I gotta say this is probably the most awkward way that I'll ever start an interview, and thought maybe with AI this would be a thing. We're gonna watch a clip, and I'll ask you a question in response if you could.
If a ceasefire means the return of the hostages and the dismantlement of a genocidal regime that has stated that they're going to attack us again, then everybody would be in favor of a ceasefire. But if a ceasefire means that we're just going to keep them quiet for a bit until they attack again, then it's Israel's obligation to defend its citizens and destroy that threat, don't you think?
Why is it necessary, is reported, to start shooting, having snipers outside a church?
I saw the reports this morning. The church, there are no churches in Gaza, so I'm not quite sure where the report is talking about.
There's a Catholic church in there, isn't there? That is.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are no Christians because they were driven out by.
Well, respectfully, there are Christians, because I spoke to an MP yesterday who has family members in the church who are Christians.
Well, I don't know what happened. I don't know who was attacked. I didn't see the report.
I guess my first question is, do you exist? Does your family exist?
Well, as you can see, I exist, and my family existed for a long, long time. I mean, the Christian community has been in Palestine for millennia, since the time of Christ. And we've been part of the Palestinian population, the Palestinian people, and we've suffered the same oppressions. We've gone through the same, living under the same occupation as Muslim Palestinians, and we've had the same, grievances and the same injustices committed against us by the Israeli state over the years.
Can you describe a little bit of Christian culture in Palestine? Because I think to some people it's almost a foreign concept.
A foreign concept. Well, I mean, it's Christian culture is no different than the Muslim culture in Palestine. It's a Palestinian culture. It's a Palestinian Arab culture, and we celebrate the same events and have we have our Christian holidays, and Muslims celebrate with us and we celebrate with them, and we're part of the same people, had the same experiences, more or less. Nothing really distinguishes us other than our faith from the rest of the Palestinian population, and our faithful traditions, Christmas, Easter.
Can you speak a little bit about that, like some of the traditions in Gaza? How did that change when Hamas came to power?
Yeah, I mean, we celebrate Christmas, we celebrate Easter, and we still do. And even with Hamas in power, I don't think there was any significant change, at least in the way that we celebrate it. Just last year, around Christmas time, there was there's available footage from the lighting of the Christmas tree ceremony, where people were celebrating. It was a joyous and festive occasion. I had relatives who were present at the ceremony. The priests were this was out in public. I believe it was at the YMCA, and the YMCA in Gaza has historically been the site of Christian celebrations and a lot of the social gatherings. It's like a social hub in Gaza, the YMCA, and I remember being there as a kid also with my family members. So in terms of Christian tradition, since Hamas's rule hasn't really changed. Maybe there's been some caution since Hamas is a religious ideology and quite a religious conservative group. So maybe there's some caution about that for certain. Yeah, but nothing. There hasn't been any systematic fear or what do you call it, discrimination.
Well, the popular narrative seems to be that Christians are somehow caught in the middle. That there's, Israel, there's the Jewish faith, the Islamic faith. The Christians are stuck in the middle, kind of don't want to be a part of either. Just sort of leave me out of this. Is that the way you would characterize it? You heard the deputy mayor of Jerusalem assert that in the clip, that Hamas drove these people out. What's the narrative that you see there?
No, absolutely not. I reject that narrative wholeheartedly, completely reject that narrative. And the reason why I'm speaking so strongly against it is because of my own personal experience. A few weeks ago, I did an interview with the Wall Street Journal, and they wanted to ask about the family members I've had who've been killed by the Israeli army in this recent operation. And when the piece was published, it wrote that the Christian minority finds itself in the crossfire of this issue between Israel and Hamas, and to think of ourselves as in the crossfire just sounds like we're some like third party entity between all this, and that's just not the case. I felt incredibly just like offended by that. Because it was just so not our experience. We experience ourselves as part and parcel of the Palestinian people and the Gazan people who are undergoing this genocide that Israel is carrying out in Gaza against us and against our families and communities. We don't see ourselves as separate. So that was a kind of really just, I found it offensive to read. We're not just some third party or separate entity that finds ourselves in the middle of a Jewish Muslim conflict. In fact, it's not even a Jewish Muslim conflict, because it's a conflict of a colonizer and colonized, occupier and occupied, and we're part of the occupied people in that equation. Our homes have been demolished in the past. Our orchards, my family's orchards in particular, were bulldozed by the Israeli military. We've had family members who were killed by the Israeli army. Churches in the past have been bombed, and not just in this particular operation. Priests have been detained. Nuns have been spat on by illegal Israeli settlers in the West Bank. That's kind of been a thing that's happened, has been happening for many, many years. And I've been hearing about these stories since I was a kid. And we've had to go through the same restrictions on movement, the same denials of what we've been through, the same restrictions on being able to see family members. I was denied from seeing my family members for many years, and the elderly passed away without even a chance at saying goodbye to them. So there's been a lot of trauma that we've experienced as Christians, as Palestinian Christians, the same kinds of traumas that Muslims go through.
Well, speaking about the Christian faith, how do you see the Christian faith specifically being played out, and how resistance is being met with the occupation?
The Christian
do you see any
faith?
difference at all? Yeah. Does it play a role? Do you see in the Christian community that their Christian faith plays a role in how this Christian faith plays a role in how you conduct your life if you're sincere to your beliefs? Do you see that in the way that they view occupation? Is there anything in that community that speaks specifically more to the way that they carry out or see the occupation in a religious lens?
Yeah, so and that can also vary amongst sects, possibly, but Palestinian Christians do see the expressions of their faith, like going to church, as sometimes an act of resistance, of non-violent resistance, and sometimes they overtly talk about it that way because of the restrictions that Israel has imposed historically on Palestinian Christians from accessing their churches and their places of worship. And there's also, of course, a feeling of we have to hold on to our faith, and we are under threat of being removed and potentially extinction, as the Christians have been expelled from Palestine historically by the Israeli government. We've been told to leave. We've been told this is not our land. We don't belong here. So even practicing your religion, practicing your faith, finding the spaces to do so, and to celebrate the occasions like Christmas and Easter, as you see in Jerusalem, the expressions of celebration are newsworthy events where international media and other tourism in Jerusalem and in Bethlehem for Christmas happen, and that's an expression of holding on to our faith and presenting our faith to the world, as not just a presentation of faith in itself, but also an act of nonviolent resistance, because we're not going to be erased from this land. We're here to stay. We were here from the time of Christ, and we'll be here in times to come.
I'm going to shift to the Holy Family Church. It's be distressing to some of the viewers who don't know what happened there, but we'll start by asking, how did Christians from various denominations end up sheltering in Holy Family Church?
Yeah, so Gaza, as you know, is pretty small, and there are 3 churches. I'm not sure if there's any more. There are 3 that I know of, and 2 of them are quite known around the world. There's the St. Porphyrius Orthodox Church and the Holy Family Catholic Church. There is also a Baptist church. There, a smaller Baptist church that I once attended, but these are the two main churches, the Orthodox and Catholic churches. And the majority of Palestinian Christians are Orthodox Christians. My family is Orthodox. And so my family went down to St. Porphyrius to shelter there. Other families went to the Catholic Church. There was no, as far as I know, there wasn't any specific division in the sense of Orthodox go there. If you're Catholic, you go there. I don't think it was like that. It's just probably more of an accessibility issue. I know the 2 churches were filled to capacity. And when St. Porphyrius was bombed on October 19, my family had to be relocated to the Catholic Church, because the room that was bombed was no longer accessible. So there was no longer any capacity for the Orthodox Church to hold any more Palestinians.
Just as a clarification, where did the bomb come from?
The bomb?
Yeah, was it IDF or was it Hamas?
No, it was IDF. It was IDF. The IDF bombed just beside the church. It wasn't right on top of the church. It was just beside it. But the church was impacted, and the ceiling of the 2nd floor collapsed. And the ceiling collapsed on top of family members. And that's where I lost my step-cousin in that tragedy. And we lost 17 other individuals in that tragedy from my extended family and friends.
And can you tell us about the shooting at Holy Family Church? And was your family present at that point? Were they already sheltering in place? Can you tell us a little? Can you tell us a little bit about the shooting itself? What happened there?
Yeah, so my family was relocated to the Catholic Church at that point, and we had heard that Israeli tanks and soldiers and snipers had taken position around the Catholic Church, the Holy Family Church. We heard this the day before the shooting happened. And so we were quite anxious, my family and I, about the situation. And we're like, what is going on? Why are they surrounding the church? What's the deal? I mean, we weren't surprised. We hear a lot about civilian infrastructure in areas that are being bombed and shot at. And we had lost my great aunt, Ilham Farah. She's my mother's aunt, on November 12th to an Israeli sniper. And there was no reports of any confrontation with fighters in the area, whether they be Hamas or other factions in the neighborhood. And you know, snipers are meant to. I mean, the point of a sniper is precision. And so he's meant to be precise in who he or she targets. And so it was strange, but also not surprising, based on historically how the Israeli army has conducted itself, that an Israeli sniper shot my great aunt. She fell to the ground and bled to death. And later we found out an Israeli tank rolled over her body and crushed her. Back to the shooting at the church. So we heard that the army had taken position around the church, and then the next day, the news came that the snipers started shooting. They shot the two women, Nahida and her daughter Summer. Nahida Anton and her daughter Summer Anton were shot and killed as they were making their way to the bathroom. Now, when I got more details, the specifics about that incident, it turns out that Summer saw her mother walking. It was just her mother who was on her way to the bathroom, and the bathroom was unfortunately not in the main hall. It was at the Sisters Convent, the Sisters of Mother Teresa Convent, and so she was walking outdoors to get to the convent, and she was shot. And when she was shot, her daughter Summer saw her get shot, and she ran out to go try to help her mother, and then she was shot as well by the snipers and killed. And then 7 other individuals ran out to also to help, and they were shot. All 7 of them were shot. They survived, thankfully, but Nahida and Summer didn't survive, didn't make it through. And then the international media heard about this and reported on this, and the Pope came up with a statement calling the Israeli fire terrorism, rightly so. And I think there was all this international pressure had some influence on the Israeli army to withdraw from the area the next day.
I'll just read actually a little bit from the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, how he described it. No warning was given, no notification was provided. They were shot in cold blood inside the premises of the parish, where there were no belligerents. Early in the morning, a rocket fired from IDF tank targeted the convent of the Sisters of Mother Teresa, the Missionaries of Charity. The convent is home to 54 disabled persons as part of a church compound, which was signaled as a place of worship since the beginning of the war. The building's generator and only source of electricity was also destroyed. The full communication is available on our social media. And you also mentioned the Pope, calling these acts of terrorism. Why do you think there's such a lack of solidarity with the plight of Christians in Gaza from the West?
I think
because these are very, the Pope, the leader of the largest denomination in the world, is coming out and using words like terror. The patriarch there is in no uncertain terms saying these type of things. Do you think there is solidarity, or do you feel there's a lack of solidarity between Christians worldwide to what's happening to the Christians in Gaza?
I think historically there's been a lack of solidarity. I think that has improved to a degree with social media and all of that. I don't know to how much of a degree, but I do see a lot more messaging around that, a lot more of Christians in the West standing in solidarity with Palestinians than I did in the past, like in the 90s and the early 2000s. I think a big part of it is just a lot of ignorance and just people not knowing that there are Palestinian Christians, the existence of Palestinian Christians. I think Israel also exploits that ignorance, and that it benefits Israel and Israeli propaganda to say that there aren't any Palestinian Christians or there aren't any in Gaza, as the deputy mayor of Jerusalem in that clip was saying. I think it's benefited Israel to say that, because they want to push the narrative that this is a Jewish versus Muslim conflict, where there are 2 equal parties, the Jews and the Muslims, going at each other. This benefits Israel because it helps to get the West on the side of the Israeli government in its ethnic cleansing operations and its expulsion of the Palestinian people and continuous military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. So I think ignorance is a big part of it. a lot of education, awareness raising needs to be made about Christians in Palestine generally. Actually, a lot of Palestinian Christians who were originally expelled by Israeli forces in 1948 went to Chile. And the largest population of Palestinian Christians outside of the Middle East is in Chile. They even have a Chilean soccer club called Palestina or something like that. It's a Palestinian club, and they wear the Palestinian flag proudly on the soccer shirt over there. Yeah, it's quite popular. I did want to say, I think another reason for Christians' lack of solidarity for Palestinian Christians is the phenomenon of Christian Zionism in the United States and in the UK. Now, the theology is quite complicated, and it's not for the purposes of an interview, but for this interview, but Christian Zionism has been somewhat, something of a phenomenon, especially in the U.S.
Evangelical circles, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm happy to say not all evangelicals fall for it, actually. There are a few who are outspoken for Palestine, like the Reverend Stephen Sizer in the U.S. has written extensively on the topic. He has two books. One is called Christian Zionism, and the other is called Zion's Christian Soldiers. And he goes quite in depth into the theology of Christian Zionism and where that interpretation of the end of days comes from.
Quite bizarre. I was just actually recently in Toronto with the Ignite group, St. Patrick's. They go to the street and they help the homeless people in the winter, and there's just the stories of trauma you hear. And I want to speak a little bit about the role of trauma because it's clinically what you deal with a lot. So we often hear in the news reports of Gaza's population being asked to move to like a safer space to avoid being killed. What's striking to me about this often is that it kind of the narrative there seems like once you're there, you're safe. It's over. At least you're safe. But the things that they've seen and taken with them is a level of trauma I don't understand. So can you speak to that, to what trauma is happening there and how you see as with your clinical background, how you see the future when trauma like this is introduced into someone's life?
It's devastating. It's absolutely devastating, and I don't think it gets enough coverage and enough consideration by politicians even, and by the decision makers, how trauma is going to impact the future, as you say. They're so focused on the present, they don't realize that what they're doing is going to be causing future conflicts if the trauma isn't confronted and dealt with, that's being created. And you said that they are told to move to safer places, right? And what's interesting here is that even the safer places haven't been safe. We've seen Israel telling Gazans to leave to safer places or designated spaces, and then bomb them either on their way to those places or bomb the places themselves when they get to them, the shelters. And so the trauma doesn't really end, does it? It's ongoing, repetitive. And we have actually a concept that Palestinian psychiatrists and therapists have been talking about for a while, which is that PTSD isn't really accurate for Palestinians as a diagnosis because it's repetitive, ongoing. There's no post in the trauma that Palestinians experience. It keeps repeating in the here and now.
Perpetual.
Perpetual.
Yeah.
And the UN, and this was maybe years ago, maybe in 2020, I don't remember the exact year, but the UN said that 300,000 children in Gaza are in need of psychosocial support, and that was a few years ago. It's risen even more now. the levels of psychological injury and trauma are massive in Gaza today, and I struggle to fathom what the future looks like for the children experiencing that kind of war trauma when they grow up. You know, they say that this is how you create terrorists, by traumatizing them as children. And we know that adult fighters today, Palestinian fighters today, like the Hamas fighters, were themselves traumatized when they were children. People know, generally speaking, that Hamas members went through wars as children. Their homes were bombarded by Israel. A lot of the Hamas leadership, their families, when they were children, their families were killed, or they lost their homes and they lost their lands. And then they grew up to become leaders of this movement. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that human beings will go to extreme measures to respond to that kind of level of oppression and expulsion and injustice. And by no means Hamas is isolated or the only phenomenon we've seen with that. You know, any oppressed peoples will have their groups of more extreme elements of resistance that come out of them. We saw it in South Africa, we saw it in Ireland, we saw it in Algeria. It keeps repeating.
And you know, we'd be remiss if we didn't bring up the attack Hamas in Israel and the trauma that is there. Now, I think speaking the language of trauma is a very interesting way to go about it, because it's not a numbers game, because clearly the number of dead in Gaza, it's not comparable. But at the same time, the trauma that happened in Israel that day, do you see that as perpetuating as well? Do you know, you said that Hamas leaders were born out of their childhood trauma. Do you see the hard right in Israel also being victims of these sort of attacks that have happened on Israel soil to the same extent, or do you see it as different?
Well, some of them, yeah, why not? Yes. I think, you know, of course there has been trauma inflicted on Israelis by Palestinians, no denying that. But then you have to look at the political situation and look at what the root cause of the trauma is. It's the Israeli state and its ideology and the terror and ethnic cleansing and occupation that it inflicted on Palestinians for decades. And you know, I know it's like a chicken and the egg, but the attacks of October 7th wasn't when it all started. As we see in the news, a lot of reporters and pundits like to start from October 7th, but there was decades of military occupation and the siege imposed on Gaza. And even before the occupation, there was the ethnic cleansing in 1948 of the Palestinian people by the Zionist movement that established the state of Israel. So, you know, and we have to see where the power is. Israel has the fourth largest strongest military in the world, and it's backed by the United States, you know, the world superpower. It's not an equal conflict between two equal parties. There is an oppressor and oppressed in this equation. There's an occupier and an occupied. Palestinians are under Israeli military occupation. So you have to go to the root cause. You have to go to what's responsible for the back and forth trauma. Even though trauma levels with Palestinians are, you know, as you said, a lot higher than Israelis.
Well, I'd like to thank you on behalf of Common Home TV for your time today. We're Redemptionist Apostolate, and we have a peacemaking tradition that goes from Ireland to the Philippines, all around the world. So we hope we can do our small bit in raising up the voice of Palestinian Christians for some solidarity, to just at least let people know that they exist, that this is happening to them as well. So we thank you for your time, and our prayer community, Bread for Today, is behind you, and we just cannot wait for this war to end.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.